Hello, my name is Stephen Policastro. I'm the founder and director of International Association for Creation, and I'm so glad that you could join us today for another ISC digital event. Today, we have our special guest, Miss Bridgette Heap, joining us. She's the co-author of The Sexual Holocaust, and this is one talk you're definitely not going to want to miss, especially with all the things happening in our current day society. So just a little bit about IAC. We're a global Christian ministry that provides virtual and face-to-face creation tours of world-class secular museums, zoos, aquariums, and planetariums around the world. We currently serve in 80 different countries, and we'd love for you to join us on one of our tours. You can go to christianmuseumtours.com to check that out, and I'll give you some more information at the end. But right now, I want to jump in, talk about the sexual Holocaust. As you guys know, James Stroud is our MC for these events, so I'm going to bring him on, and he's going to introduce both Bridgette and our special guest Ashley as well. So welcome, James.
All right, welcome, guys. Well, we are doing something a little different tonight. I know that we mostly have focused on traditional apologetics in the past events. This one is going to be more cultural apologetics, what you might say. And we usually think of apologetics strictly from the traditional standpoint, science, history, literature, origins, etc. But cultural apologetics is just as important, if not more so, in many ways today. One of my favorite authors and apologists, Francis Schaeffer, was very big in the mid and late 20th century connecting these things. And one of his students, Nancy Piercy, who wrote Love Thy Body, answering hard questions about life and sexuality, has done the same thing. And I've always been a huge fan of Nancy's, and I've read a few of her books like Love Thy Body, and it reminded me a lot of Bridgette's book, The Sexual Holocaust, that you'll be hearing about this evening. And in 2016, I was actually invited to the C.S. Lewis Fellows tract of the Discovery Institute, where we covered many of the topics that Bridgette's probably going to touch on and her book touches on. For example, Alfred Charles Kinsey, in the sexual revolution of the mid 20th century. What was that? What, did it lead to, et cetera, et cetera. And so I really think you're in for a treat tonight. And again, I really encourage you guys. The book's a very easy read, authored by Bridgette and Dr. Sanford, who we hosted last time, and also help spread this video around to others that may need to hear this important message, both in and outside of the church. And also, sexualholocaust.org is going to be the website we'll be touching on. And again, if you have any questions at all during the event, no questions unwelcome. Feel free to text it to 479-616-4520. And without further ado, we will introduce our speakers this evening. Bridgette Heap has a bachelor's degree in mathematics and is currently working on her master's in Christian apologetics. She is married to her best friend, Aaron, and together they have two beautiful children who she has been homeschooling for the past few years. Since graduating college, Bridgette has had her own photography business, worked for Lamplighter Publishing, and is now is an author and research associate for FMS Foundation. Bridgette also has a theater ministry for children's ages 5 to 18 called the Storybook Theater, and she began working on the sexual Holocaust because of her desire to protect women and children from the effects of anything goes sexuality. She views this book as an opportunity to influence modern day culture with wholesome values and shed light on such of a personal and important topic. And with her, Ashley Earnshaw, who dialogued with Dr. Sanford last time, is also going to be helping lead that dialogue with Bridgette tonight. And Ashley describes herself first and foremost as a follower of Christ. Everything else is fluff. Ashley is currently working toward a master's of public health at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. She holds a bachelor degree in biochemistry and exercise science, also from UTC, and she had the privilege of growing up in a home that was Christ-centered. This upbringing included being homeschooled And through these educational experiences, she has studied much about with the Bible, what the Bible says about science, education, family, and interacting with others. Ashley is currently living in Chattanooga, where she helps her 96-year-old grandmother, and in her free time, she enjoys running and reading books about science, history, and music. Bridgette, Ashley, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Bridgette. It's so good to have you here today. This is a privilege and an honor. You're speaking on a subject that is crucial for us to hear. As it is convicting and encouraging, I just pray that we will learn something new tonight. So please share with us what you have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ashley. So as it was mentioned, tonight we're going to be talking about sexuality, and is an incredibly personal subject. So, everybody's going to have different responses and different comfort levels to this topic. But it's still such an important topic to discuss, especially when, we see the escalating harm that we're seeing today. It was kind of, James mentioned it a little bit already, but some of your viewers on forum might actually be wondering, like, why are we discussing sexuality, at a creation forum? And Dr. Sanford brought up this question about a month ago when he was on this forum, and he mentioned about the importance of this issue. And I just want to add to that, when we consider creation, we're really asking, were things made by design, or are they supposed to work a certain way? And we're asking the same thing about sexuality tonight. Is sexuality designed to work a specific way, or can we do whatever we want with our sexuality? And the growing mentality today is anything goes. We can do whatever we want with our sexuality. And as we're going to discuss tonight, sexuality doesn't work apart from God's plan. So when God created Adam and Eve as male and female, he defined sexuality and he gave us a plan for our sexuality. So sexuality is really a beautiful God-given gift, but because of our human nature, sexuality very easily becomes harmful instead of a blessing. And that's why we're having this conversation. Christians have failed to lead this conversation. And I think in many cases, both Christians and non-Christians, they don't accept at face value what the Bible says about sexuality. They think that it's either old-fashioned or they think that it's irrelevant for today. But whether you're Christian or not, as we start to look around at the world around us, we start to see that anything goes sexuality just isn't working for us. And so I think that is going to start to make the Bible's definition of sexuality more compelling. And that's actually what I'd like to talk about a little bit tonight, is what we're seeing around us. So I'd like to walk us through what Dr. Sanford and I call the Sexual Holocaust. And, this is a really dark topic, but along the way, I hope that I can make a few points that will point out the difference between God's design for sexuality and anything goes sexuality. And hopefully those points will defend biblical sexuality a little bit to us. And then hopefully end with just a little bit of hope and some light topic, just to shed some light basically on such a dark topic. So does that sound okay with you, Ashley?
It sounds wonderful. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you for presenting this.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. So I am a research associate at Feed My Sheep Foundation. So I work for Dr. John Sanford, writing, conducting research. And Dr. Sanford and I have spent almost 2 years writing a short booklet called The Sexual Holocaust, A Global Crisis. The main focus of the book is simply to just warn the world that unrestrained sexuality is not working for humanity. So instead of being fulfilling, anything goes sexuality is actually causing devastating amounts of harm.
When I heard about this book last month with Dr. Sanford, the title was just caused you to pause and hesitate. And so how did you all come up with this title?
Yeah, so the title is pretty provocative. So anything goes sexuality was promoted by the sexual revolution, and it basically pitted sexual restraint against sexual liberty. And we wanted the title to make it clear that the result of that movement was not some glorious revolution that brought about, new sexual liberties and fulfillment, but that it literally brought about a Holocaust. And, as we're going to see in a little bit, that's not an exaggeration. So this book is not comprehensive. We don't cover every sexual issue, but it does give a dire picture, basically, of what's happening today with human sexuality. So to start off with, I'd like to just give a definition of the sexual Holocaust. So the sexual Holocaust is a multidimensional global crisis stemming from unrestrained sexual behaviors that have resulted in profound harm to humanity. So physical harm, emotional harm, social harm, and spiritual harm. Now, Ashley, at first glance here, this might just look like a list of some areas in our life, but it's actually an escalating cycle, starting with physical harm and working all the way up to spiritual harm. So I want you to think of like a snowball effect. Mm-hmm. So at each level, the harm is more severe, it's longer lasting, and it's going to have a greater effect on the other areas of our life.
Wow.
Tonight, we're going to go over a bunch of statistics, but I don't want to go over a ton of them just because you can read them in the book. You can even download a free PDF of the book and read about them. You can even look statistics up online, and statistics change so quickly. And statistics, they're not always accurate. Statistics are, estimates. They're supposed to just give a big picture. And that's basically what I want to do tonight is I want us to take a step back, and I want us to just look at the big picture of what's happening with sexuality in the world today. And remember, this isn't comprehensive. So that means that whatever we address tonight is actually really only the tip of the iceberg.
Okay.
First, let's go ahead and start. Let's look at the physical harms. I'm going to start to just get this picture that anything goes sexuality isn't working for humanity. So the first physical harm I'd like to look at are sexually transmitted diseases. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a question up here on the board for everybody to look at, just to kind of help see if we're all on the same page in terms of what's actually happening. Okay, so my first question is, how many people are infected with a sexually transmitted disease? The answer to that is just a little over 1.2 billion people worldwide are infected with a sexually transmitted disease. That's according to the World Health Organization report from 2018. And what that is that's actually only those who are infected with the 8 most prevalent STDs. So there's actually more infections out there than this, okay?
Wow.
Just to give you guys, a picture of what this looks like, okay? So to show the magnitude of unrestrained sexuality, I want to equate this to all of North and South American populations. And the reason why we can equate this to all of North and South American populations is because in those continents are inhabited by just over 1 billion people. So if we were going to map out the number of people who have an STD, we could essentially map it out just like this, okay? Now, tell me about it, right? Of those 8 most prevalent STDs, only half of them are actually curable. So that means that most of these people that are infected are going to be living with the disease the rest of their life, and many of them are going to die prematurely because of their STD. So, Ashley, already to me, this looks like a pretty dire picture, kind of like a Holocaust, and this is just one effect of unrestrained sexuality. So hopefully this is setting the stage for our conversation tonight about the magnitude of this global crisis.
It is tragic. I'm tearing up just hearing this statistic on STDs. Wow, I did not know this.
Right. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's look at our next physical harm, which is violence and abuse. Okay. So again, I'm going to stick a question up here for us. What percentage of women globally have experienced physical or sexual violence? And that's going to be about 35% of women, so about 1.2 billion women. So again, this is a pretty similar number to the number of STD cases that we've seen. So again, we can equate this to basically all of North and South American populations being abused. So if we were going to map that out, again, it would be basically a very similar map, okay? Now, we can't just add the number of STD cases with the number of abuse cases because there's going to be overlap. So we might have a woman who has been abused who now also has an STD. And we're not going to be able to get an exact number of the individuals who have been harmed. But the point is that, a significant percentage of the world's population is going to be affected by unrestrained sexuality. And again, Ashley, this is just considering, one specific part of the population, women. So next I want to look at children. Okay, so again, I'm going to stick a question up here for us to consider. What percentage of children will be sexually abused before they turn 18 years old? So it's 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys. That's about 20% of children. And that's a heartbreaking number. So I don't think I need to, show a map anymore. I think we're getting the idea that, before we're done with this discussion, we're going to have most of the world colored in with people who have been affected by unrestrained sexuality. And just right here, I just want to mention real quick that because of the COVID shutdown, we're actually seeing an increase in domestic violence and child abuse cases. So these statistics that we've put together over the past couple of years, they're already outdated, and they're actually lower than what we're going to be seeing over the next few years. And to me, that's really sobering information.
This is such sobering information. I'm aware of some of this stuff is working in public health, but wow, my heart is hurting.
It's really tough when you put it all together and you start to see the big picture, just how the magnitude of it. So, okay, so next let's talk about another physical harm, slavery and bondage. So there are 24.9 million people who are trafficked worldwide, and a little bit more than half of them are sexually exploited. At least 1 in 5 men in America have solicited a prostitute, and it's estimated that there are 40 to 42 million prostitutes worldwide. Now, because of the employment crisis in the US due to the COVID shutdown, a lot of young adults have actually turned to prostitution as a viable means for employment. And so again, we're going to see that these statistics are already outdated, and again, they're going to be lower than what the actual number is. Okay, so again, if you can just imagine coloring in the world, that's going to be difficult to do because of the overlap between STD cases, abuse cases, cases of bondage. But the idea is that, the world at large is affected by unrestrained sexuality, okay? So again, let's take a couple of questions up here for us to consider. What is the average age that females become victims of prostitution? So meaning, when do they become a prostitute? The average age is 12 to 14 years old, okay? So if you think about it, these young girls, they're just hitting puberty. That's a time in life when, your body's changing, life is changing. It's already scary enough, but now to find yourself as a prostitute, I can't even imagine what that must be like for these girls. What's the average age that males first become victims of prostitution? So this is 11 to 13 years old. So boys actually become prostitutes at a younger age than girls do.
Wow. I did not know that. Wow.
Right. I never thought that either. So that was surprising to me too. All right. I have one more question on this specific harm. Every year, traffickers exploit how many children in the commercial sex trade? It's about 1 million children. Again, Ashley, we're seeing really scary numbers. And this is not just something that's happening halfway around the world like we see in Liam Neeson's movie Taken. In our book, we actually include real life stories for all of the physical harms that we address. And in particular, the sex trafficking story takes place in Texas. So, somebody viewing tonight might actually be living right next door to somebody who has been in slavery or in bondage in this way. And when we realize just how close we are to these issues, that should wake us up to the importance of being able to address unrestrained sexuality.
Wow. It's so much information that I'm receiving. I'm overwhelmed. Oh, wow.
And, okay. It's a little difficult when you realize too that it's that close. Sometimes we watch movies and we think, wow, it's something happening halfway around the world. And when you realize it's not, it's happening right next door. Mm-hmm. Makes it a little different. So, okay, now, Ashley, up until this point, we've actually been talking about issues that, for the most part, most of us agree on. So, sexually transmitted diseases, violence, bondage, these are all physical harms that, for the most part, we all agree that we need to work on ending. But now we're going to talk about some topics that are a little bit more controversial, okay? Now, Internet pornography, it's a huge industry. It makes up 30% of internet traffic. So that means that these sites are larger than movie sites. So say, for example, like Hulu, okay? And that amazes me. So when you think about all of the movies that are on movie sites and you realize that there are even more pornography videos available, that shocks me. When most people think about pornography, they think about Playboy magazines and they think about, viewing women naked. However, internet pornography is much more explicit. So it displays incest, abuse, bondage, child molestation, and every other form of deviant behavior. Now, at the beginning of the COVID shutdown, major pornography sites actually took advantage of the situation and they offered 1 month free to their sites because they knew that people were going to be stuck at home and they wanted to get people hooked on their sites because they had nothing to do. So let me check it out. And so when I heard about that, I thought, wow, that's pretty sad, that they took advantage of the situation like that. So, okay, so at this point, let me go ahead and stick a couple questions up here. So let's look specifically at Christian men. So what percentage of Christian men struggle with pornography? It's around 60%. Non-Christian men struggle with pornography more so than Christian men. But the point of this is that, regardless of who you are, whether you consider yourself a Christian or non-Christian, this is a topic that is really important to all of us. And a lot of people actually think that pornography is not harmful, but it is. So, it can create a hardcore addiction. It can damage your brain in the same way that illegal drugs can damage your brain. It increases violence and it also increases impotency. So there's actually a lot of young, healthy guys out there now who are seeing therapists for impotency. In our book, we talked about one licensed therapist who commented and said that, most pornography users get to the point where they don't even like to have sex anymore. So, for the young guys out there listening, you might think that viewing pornography is not affecting you, but it might actually affect, your future marriages and your body and, just your physical health in ways that you may never have expected it to. But this isn't just an issue for guys. So I want to look at statistics for women too. So what percentage of Christian women struggle with pornography? We're going to see about 40% of Christian women saying that they're struggling with pornography. So again, non-Christian women struggle with it a little bit more. And we're increasingly seeing women viewing pornography. And again, ladies who are listening tonight, we are going to struggle with pornography similar to men, and pornography is going to have the same effect on us that it does on men too. Okay.
Wow, these numbers with men and women, Christian believers. Brothers and sisters in Christ, these numbers are shocking. But are adults the only pornography users out there, or is it more pervasive?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So older you get, typically the less somebody uses pornography. Okay, so the largest consumer of internet pornography are actually 12 to 17-year-olds. So this means that there are actually more 12 to 17-year-olds using pornography than like 20 to 30-year-olds. And when you think about the effects of pornography on a child's developing brain, this becomes a severe problem, especially when you consider the fact that, they're still going through puberty. So, they're just trying to understand sexuality and what it means to be a male and female. And then they're, viewing pornography and they're getting all sorts of conflicting ideas of what that means. Okay, so let me throw a couple of questions up here on the board. What is the average age of first viewing pornography? So the average age is 11 years old. So that is really young. This is incredibly detrimental, knowing the addictiveness of pornography and the effects that it has on its viewers. The under 10 age group, so now we're talking about really little kids, okay? So the under age group actually accounts for 1 in 10 of the visitors to pornography sites. Large number of little kids that are learning the wrong things about sex and about intimate relationships. And in the book, we go into that in a little bit more detail. Mm-hmm. So, Ashley, some people watching this might be sitting here thinking like, well, my sexuality is my own personal business, and everyone else's, it's their own personal business. But if we're not engaging with each other on these topics, and we're not a part of each other's lives, then we're actually hurting each other, and we're letting unrestrained sexuality continue to harm our friends, and our neighbors and our family members and future generations. 87% of people say that no one is helping them avoid pornography. That's a large percentage of people that nobody cares, like nobody's trying to help me. So we need to be equipped to have these conversations with people, even as awkward as we may feel about having them. My kids, they're 8 and they're 6, and I've been starting to have, conversations with them about sexuality, and I'm realizing that I'm the only one in these conversations that feels awkward. To them, sexuality is perfectly normal. She's a girl, he's a boy. Their bodies are, they're different. They need to protect their bodies. They need to protect each other and other people. But the problem, the breakdown comes with the parents. Then I think that as parents, we're not doing a good job of teaching our kids. I think that we just let schools do it. I think that maybe unknowingly we let our kids' peers or their friends teach them, or we let the media teach them, or we let pornography teach them. So I think that this should help wake us up to the fact that especially as parents and grandparents, we need to be aware of what our kids are viewing, what they have access to, and just how young kids are viewing pornography.
Yes, this is definitely a conversation that has to be had with every generation, but certainly with our children, so that they will grow to not fall into these traps as they get older.
Absolutely. Okay, so the last physical harm talk about is abortion. Now, we understand that abortion is one of the most controversial, topics that our book addresses, and we don't get into a moral debate. We simply present the statistics and point out the harms that are related to the issue. Many people actually advocate for freer abortion laws because they think it's better for the mother to abort the baby than to keep it. So we go through several misconceptions in the book, and we show how the mentality today is not empowering women in their choices. It's actually enslaving them. So just to give one example, most women admit that they don't want to abort their babies. They do so because of lack of family and financial support. And so as you can see, that's not really empowering a woman then or supporting her to, in her desire to keep her child. Okay, so let me stick a couple questions up here. So what percentage of global abortions are due to rape and incest combined? So, rape and incest are kind of one of those heavy hitters that, a woman should have the choose. So what percentage of global abortion rates are due to rape and incest combined? It's 1.5%. This is a significantly small percentage of abortions that are performed because of rape and incest, and that's combined. Now, abortions due to mother and fetal health, again, kind of another, a lot of people say women should have the right to choose, if it's health-related issues. So abortions due to mother and fetal health combined, those are 7%, okay? This means that the vast majority of abortions are performed for other reasons. So U.S. Institute's survey showed that 92% of the participants gave the following reasons for having an abortion. Either a child would interfere with their education or their career, they weren't mature enough to have a child, they didn't want to be a single mother, they were done having kids, they couldn't afford a baby, they weren't ready to have a child. So this is really telling information. The vast majority of abortions are actually performed out of convenience and not for health reasons. So yeah, that to me is shocking. If women were actually given more financial and family support, they would be able to have their babies and pursue their careers and their educations. And to me, it seems more like real empowerment, not making them feel like they've got to choose between one or the other.
And I have this discussion on campus with my fellow students often over the past several years, and I never thought about it as it's actually lacking empowering women, because it on the secular university I'm at, it's all about empowering women. We are equal. We are oftentimes better than men. But in this case, the abortions are not empowering women. They're tearing them down.
Right. And most people don't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I've got one more question here, and this is actually the last question I'm going to stick up on the board here. In the past generation, so about 40 years, how many humans have been intentionally killed worldwide? And that's going to be about 1.5 billion babies have been killed worldwide. So again, that number should look a little familiar. It's going to be a little bit more than kind of the STD cases that we've seen. So again, we can equate that to basically wiping out all of North and South America. Now, I want to put this in a little bit more of a different perspective. So this chart right here, it actually, this compares the top causes of death per year. So that starts with actually the little orange bar and goes all the way over to the tiniest little bar that you can see. That compares the top 10 leading causes of death with the number of abortions every year. So the number of abortions, that's the tall blue column. Mm-hmm. So abortions every year, there's roughly 50 million abortions globally, okay? Abortions claim more lives every year than the top 10 leading causes of death combined. Wow. So this is why we're calling this a global crisis and why we're calling this a Holocaust, because the physical harm that is associated with unrestrained sexuality, it's unbelievable. So the numbers, if you take these numbers of abortion cases and you add it with the number of people who are addicted to pornography, and if you add it to the abuse cases we've seen and the bondage, and you add it to the STD cases, we have a Holocaust on our hands. And at this point, we've only addressed the physical issues. We haven't even talked about the emotional, social, and the spiritual ones. We've only addressed the physical so far. So, okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in then to the emotional harm. So at this point, I don't want to go into a ton of detail. I want to just kind of give a big overview of what we say in the book. So the book addresses loneliness, rejection, depression, and suicide. So studies are actually showing that loneliness is now an epidemic. It's one of the top fears in the world. Only about half of the American population has in-person, meaningful daily interactions with friends or family. And to me, that just amazes me. If you think about the quantity of different ways that we communicate, I think it shows just the shallowness of our relationships. Now, rejection, more than physical pain, because if you think about a time that you were rejected, you hurt all over again, and that doesn't necessarily happen when we have physical pain. So that shows just the difference between our physical pain and our emotional pain, and just the severity of emotional pain. Now, more than 75% of those suffering from depression have experienced some form of trauma as a child. So let me say that again, just because I think that's a huge percentage of people. So 75% of those who are suffering from depression, they've experienced some form of trauma as a child. Now, studies are actually showing that a genetic vulnerability is only going to lead to depression if that individual experienced trauma earlier in their life that triggers the depression. We just spent like the last half hour, going over a bunch of harms and trauma. And so I think it's pretty easy to see that the sexual Holocaust is causing so much of the depression that we see today.
I know as a public health professional studying to be one, we talk about ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, and that I didn't realize it was such a large percentage that suffer from depression later in life. Mm-hmm. And that is so sad to hear.
Yeah. So about one person every 40 seconds commits suicide. So, depression oftentimes when it can't be controlled, a lot of times that leads to suicide. So we're seeing that right now the statistic is about one person every 40 seconds commits suicide. So suicide is a consequence of a major emotional breakdown in one's life. It's the trauma or stress that just is, those are too large to handle. Mm-hmm. So Ashley, I want to take you back for a second and just remind you of that snowball effect that I mentioned earlier. Okay. mention that here and explain it a little bit. So, you know, these emotional harms that we're talking about, they lead individuals to do more unrestrained physical behaviors. And those unrestrained physical behaviors in turn just lead to more emotional harms. And that's going to continue to just cycle itself over and over again until it either becomes too much to handle or until a person can finally find their way out of it. So that's how that works there.
It's a sad cycle.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about the social harms right now. Mm-hmm. Again, with this section, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it. I just want to give just an overview of what the book says. So in the book, we talk about the breakdown of marriage. We talk about the breakdown of family. We talk about redefining the child and institutionalizing anything goes sexuality. So once society says that marriage is arbitrary and love is relative, everything becomes permissible. And I just want to repeat that. Everything becomes permissible. So in the book, we give examples of what that looks like. And we talk about where it's actually heading in the future too. So because marriage has become marginalized, you know, so is the family. So families are actually in decline right now, and they're increasingly fluid. Nations are actually watching their populations implode because families are declining. The family structure is so vital that it affects our global economy. It affects the shape of our nations. Now, with the changes in marriage and the changes in family, and due to advancements in technology, we're seeing how childhood has been altered in ways that we're not quite sure yet of the consequences. So we might have to re-examine what it means to be human over the next few decades as genetic alterations and cloning, as they become more possible and as they become just more morally acceptable. So right now there are things that are possible with CRISPR, but the question kind of around that is, you know, what's morally acceptable right now? Mm-hmm. Actually, this is kind of the crux of this section, okay? So without traditional marriages, without strong families, and without a secure childhood, people continue to lean on the government, they lean on institutions, and they lean on the media for support. So whether that's financial support, whether that's emotional support, whether that's education, okay? Mm-hmm. The problem is that the media, institutions, our government, they are all of the ones that are supporting or promoting anything goes sexuality. So for example, it just came out that, you know, Netflix has that new documentary that sexualizes 11-year-old girls the documentary is called Cuties. And that's, to me, that's just amazing that they even think that that's okay to have something like that available. The problem here is that the government, institutions, the media, they teach that rights are at odds with our responsibilities. They act like those two things, you know, they're not compatible. So what they do is they end up promoting the right of individuals over our responsibilities to one another. Mm-hmm. Again, we're going to see this snowball effect at every level. So here, what we're seeing is because of the lack of social order and structure, individuals are hurting emotionally. They try to bury their emotional pain and social dysfunction in unrestrained physical behaviors. Those physical behaviors only cause more physical, emotional, and social harm for themselves and for others. And then that's just going to cycle itself over and over again until either somebody can find their way out or until that becomes too much for them to handle. So that brings me into the last section here, which is the spiritual harms. And I do want to take a little bit more time, Ashley, to go through these, okay? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
That we go through in the book. So the first one that we talk about is vain and false identities. So vain identities are the way that we identify ourselves that are temporary or superficial. And false identities are a willful denial of an obvious truth, or they can be delusions. So Dr. Sanford and I believe that, you know, the reason for the surge of false and vain identities is because people are desperately searching for their true value or their true worth. So the sexual revolution has actually turned people into objects. You know, most often we only feel valuable if we get affirmation from others that we value. Now, I think that this is actually evidence that sexuality was designed to work a specific way. So see if you can follow me through this, Ashley. Dr. Smith and I suggest that as humans, our identity comes from God. As humans, we are created in the image of God. We're loved by God, and we have value simply because God chose to give us life. So this type of identity is available to all humanity, and it's not based on the affirmation that we get from others. But many people reject this view simply because this identity comes with responsibility. So if God made us in his image, why don't we act like it? You know, and sometimes that might mean that we have to restrain ourselves. Our worth doesn't come from what we can get from or give to others. It comes from who we were created to be, men and women created in God's image. And that actually leads right into the next spiritual harm, which is guilt and shame, right? If we're not doing what we think is right, we're going to feel guilty. So guilt that's associated with unrestrained sexual behaviors, that arises from our conscience, and it warns us that, you know, warns us of the multiple harms caused by anything goes sexuality. So in other words, Ashley, our sense of guilt, it's an indicator that certain behaviors are wrong or harmful. Now, again, I think that this supports the idea that sexuality is supposed to work a specific way. When we don't do things God's way, we're going to get a gentle warning called guilt. Without acknowledging that we've done something wrong, how can we ever correct ourselves? How can we ever be corrected or repent or turn away from that or even be forgiven? Like, how could forgiveness work if we don't ever turn away from being wrong? So, see, I think God gave us guilt to help us navigate the way that sexuality is supposed to work. But actually, like all things, our guilt indicators are broken. The more that we normalize irresponsible behaviors in our culture and in our individual lives, the less guilt we feel. So this is really important, I think, okay? Many industries and institutions, they're trying to normalize unrestrained sexual behaviors purposely to reduce our guilt, okay? For this reason, the less guilty we feel, the more money they can make on our desires, all right? So let me just say that again. The less guilty we feel, the more money they can make on our desires, right? We've heard that. Sex sells, right? Sex and violence, that's why it's in Hollywood. That's what they make their movies off of. So that should be a huge warning to us that the government, media, institutions, they don't have our back. They're not there to protect us. It's our job to be aware of what's going on. It is our job to be guardians of our heart, basically. And so, we need to be careful because our hearts can easily be hijacked if we let our guard down. Okay, we've got two more here, Ashley. I know this is so. Okay, so the next spiritual harm I want to talk about is destruction of true love. So Dr. Sanford and I, we suggest that true love is actually the exact opposite of the love that is promoted by the sexual revolution. So true love is willing to be restrained because true love puts God and others first. So love is actually really hard for other worldviews to define and explain its origins. Love is kind of equated to affirmation today. If you love me, like, you're going to affirm everything I do. But the problem is that it should be obvious that, not all things should be affirmed. So the essence of the sexual Holocaust is that people are putting themselves first before others. And because we're spiritually broken, we're really easily thinking that personal restraint is a bad thing. Our hearts, they're not in the right place. Therefore, we think that, we're easily persuaded to think that our personal rights should triumph over our personal responsibilities, but that's not really love. So God's plan for sexuality actually gives us a definition for love that both protects and it brings pleasure. Let me just say that again, because I think that's so cool. God's plan for sexuality gives us a definition for love that both protects and brings pleasure. And, any other definition other than God's is not going to provide that for us. Okay, last spiritual harm we have here, eternal consequences. Now, I'm actually just finishing up an apologetics course on culture and film. And one of the things that I found really amazing was that most movies actually try to answer this question. They ask, what does it mean to be human? And I think part of that answer, I think, has to do with our free will. As humans, to be human is to be able to choose between good and evil. The problem, though, is that today it seems like many people live without any universal moral code. People don't seem to be living by universal moral code anymore. So instead, much of the world kind of teeters between nihilism and some form of a self-made morality. So, for example, if you ask students on a campus, okay, if child molesters or mass murderers should be punished in the next life for the wrongs that they've done, most people are going to say yes. But when you ask them about themselves personally, they try to slip out the back door of the conversation, and they try to deny that there's any standard by which we should all be judged. Okay, so that's the problem. We've just looked at all of these things that are, bad, horrible things that we feel like, wow, we need justice in some of these cases, with sex trafficking and violence and abuse. The problem is, though, without a universal moral standard, all of that justice is meaningless. We need to have some kind of higher moral standard that holds us all accountable. So since we're free to choose between right and wrong, we're going to be held responsible for our choices. Now, Ashley, tonight we've talked about, a massive number of physical deaths caused by unrestrained sexuality. We've talked about emotional deaths that have led to suicide. We've talked about the death of family and nations. We also need to consider spiritual death, that is a real possibility. And, we need to consider warning our friends and our neighbors that our choices, they have physical and emotional and social and spiritual consequences. I've got one more thing that I'd like to talk about before we close here. Mm-hmm. And so that is actually, I'd like to read to you guys a passage here. It's actually one of Dr. Sanford's favorite passages that he likes to talk about when he talks about this topic. It's from Ezekiel 33, 7-9. I just want to read it real quick. It says, "Now as for you, son of man, I have appointed you a watchman for the house of Israel. So you will hear a message from my mouth, a warning from me. When I say to the wicked, O wicked man, you will surely die, and you do not speak to warn the wicked from his way, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, and I will require from your hand. But if you, on your part, warn a wicked man to turn from his way, and he does not turn from his way, he will die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your life." So, we're not responsible for the choices of others, but we are responsible for warning our friends and our neighbors of the dangers that they can face. So, Ashley, I know that this has been just an incredibly dark topic tonight, but I want to just end with a few thoughts about some light that is happening. Okay, so first of all, many people are actually being healed from the consequences of unrestrained sexuality. People have overcome addiction and bondage. Many marriages have been restored. If you ask for a testimony from those who have gone through the sexual Holocaust and they've come out of it, there's not going to be a one answer fits all. But I do think that there are some similarities. So, one similarity is that, people will often testify that they couldn't do this on their own. It took a supernatural work of Jesus Christ to heal or overcome or restore their personal life. And I think that we can help with this. I think we can help bring people out of the darkness and into the light. I think that we can help warn others that the mentality of anything goes sexuality, that's not working for the world today. We're seeing more harm than we are good come out of it. And I think that we can also share the hope of Jesus Christ, that there is somebody there that will help people overcome this. So at Feed My Sheep, we are currently working on putting together resources and testimonies to help bring about change in our community. And on our website, let me go ahead and stick our website up there for you. So on our website, you can find some videos that we've made, and you can find some more information about the book. And there's actually also a pledge that we have online that you can take to join us in spreading a message of hope to people who are hurting. So Ashley, I know this is an incredibly depressing topic, but I hope that it has showed just the magnitude of what's happening. But I also hope that it's showing that, there's work to be done, but that we can be doing this work, but that it starts with us. So it starts with our real lives, having real lives with each other. It starts with our conversations with each other. And so, many people, they are coming into the light now. And I think that we all need to ask ourselves this question, though. What can I do to help more people come out of the darkness and into the light? That's pretty much what I have for tonight.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this. Just the understanding, you're just cracking the door just a little bit for us to understand what this sexual Holocaust is about. And it is very depressing and saddening that this is occurring right next door, or in you, sometimes in your own life, for some who might be listening right now. So what can we do now? Now that we've heard this, what can we do? What's next?
Yeah, so at least for us at Feed My Sheep Foundation, we've been wondering the same question, like what should we do? We've had a couple of ideas. We understand that there isn't going to be a one answer fits all. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about is getting a bunch of counselors and doctors, pastors, anybody who's basically on the front lines, who daily walk with people who have been in bondage, who have been abused, who have an STD, who are dealing emotionally, who have broken marriages, who deal with all of this, and try to put all of these things together, testimonies from people who have gone through the sexual Holocaust and who've come out of it, to put all of this into one book, a book that would be essentially the light. We have a book about the darkness, now we want a book about the light, and just to share that so that, maybe somebody who is struggling can say, wow, okay, there is hope. And so hope for that person might look a little bit different than another person, because this is all going to be very individualized. But the idea is that at least maybe we can write something that is hope for people. And so we're hopefully going to try to put something together like that. We're just waiting for God to kind of bring the right people alongside us to put that together. One of the other things that we've been considering is helping parents to be more aware of what's happening, and putting together something for parents that would help them to be able to talk with their kids, to be able to help protect them, and then also just to help them be aware of what's going on, what kind of access do they have through the internet, through cell phones, things like that too, and possibly even a curriculum that a student can do that walks them through biblical sexuality, so not just sexuality but biblical sexuality, and also be able to defend it. So those are some of the things that, at least for Feed My Sheep Foundation, we're thinking of. What can we do next? Mm-hmm. But again, we understand that it's not going to be a one answer fits all. So we're kind of just waiting on God's leading for that.
Mm-hmm. And if there are people who are interested in possibly collaborating with you, pastors, counselors, that the best way for them to contact you would be through the sexualholocaust.org. Is that?
Yeah. Yep. There's contact information on there. There's places where people can submit testimonies to us. So yeah, all the information should be right online.
All right. Well, Bridgette, thank you so very, very much for taking your time to put this presentation together, for presenting it to us. It has been convicting and eye-opening to me, and I am excited to see what the Lord does through your ministry and through this book, and hopefully our world can move out of the darkness and into the light. I know people have been asking I think people have been asking questions. So, and I know James has some, so I'm gonna step away, and thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to meet you and talk with you, and I will go ahead and let James pop on, and he can lead our Q&A time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ashley.
All right, well, ladies, thank you very much. That was a fantastic talk, and like I said, I can't encourage everybody enough. Get the there we go, the book, and again, there's even like the appendix. There's a lot of other follow-up sites, and again, I read through it last weekend. A very easy, fluid read. And yeah, it's definitely can't recommend it enough. Well, we got actually quite a few questions rolling in. I was over here trying to sort them, put them together the best I could. And the first one, if we want to just jump right into it, pretty much Ashley asked right at the end, so I think it's you'll probably get the same answer. Love the book. Is there any way we can either have you via Zoom or in person speak at our church or small group? Churches seem to want to avoid the topic instead of tackling it. Can you be contacted at sexualholocaust.org? Are you going into counseling? I guess that is with your apologetics, I guess, what they're asking.
Yeah. So that was okay. So there's a few things there. So first of all, yes. So Dr. Sanford and I, we are available to speak at different venues, and you can contact us through sexualholocaust.org. So I personally am not going into counseling. My heart in apologetics is to be able to reach people and to be able to talk to them and to engage with them in all sorts of conversations. I love the creation, conversation, as well as talking about social issues, as well as talking about political issues. So for me, I don't necessarily feel like that calling is specifically counseling, but what I want to do though is I want to be able to help connect people with amazing counselors that are already out there and that they're being called to do that. So yeah, that is kind of one of the things that we're working on is, what is next? How do we help make those connections? And, one of the things that we're seeing is that there's a lot of organizations out there that are kind of separate little organizations. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect everybody so that they can help support each other. And so that, somebody who is feeling like they're in the middle of this, where do I go? So that's one of the things that we kind of feel like we can help with that is, again, show the big picture, show all the organizations that are involved, show, kind of help connect all the counselors and things like that. So hopefully that answered that question.
And I believe the second question was about, does Dr. Sanford, is he available? Listen to him last time. Is he also involved and available to speak? You pretty much answered that. And this one kind of goes hand in hand. I'm just curious how your interest in apologetics has led you to Sexual Holocaust. Do you think your apologetics and this work will grow as you continue your education in apologetics? Would you consider yourself a cultural apologist?
So that's a really interesting question, since I'm actually going to school on the philosophy track, not the cultural track. But I do see a lot of, I guess in a way I have a lot of interest. That becomes where it becomes practical, right? When you're engaging with the culture. And one of the things that I found really helpful for me was, especially as my kids grow older, I have to be able to teach them and engage with them and help them to be able to defend themselves and help them to be able to navigate what they're seeing out there in the world. And so that helps me to just be able to, first and foremost, they're my priority. But then after that, I want to be able to have that conversation and help other parents to have those types of conversations with their kids and engage with, other teens and young adults and adults about just what's happening. So even though I personally, just love philosophical debates, I think that it ends essentially in a cultural setting where, we're living our lives with each other, and it comes down to that. So.
And your comment on pornography being endorsed by many colleges and universities in your book, can't remember what page number, but would this, coupled by the dropping IQ levels of students and the politics of the classroom, with the politics in the classroom, do you agree with those like Sam Sorbo or Nancy Pearcey that Christians have no excuse any longer for leaving their kids in public schools, and that it's time to seriously reconsider sending them off to mainline universities?
Okay, so part of this is, I don't want to make a statement about whether you should send your kids to public school or college or things like that. I think that that's a very personal decision that people have to make. I was not homeschooled. I went to public school my whole life, and I can see the benefits of it and in the ways that I've grown. That being said, though, one of the things that's happening is in our education system today, we are seeing a radical change in the type of education. So originally, education was meant to be like, let's make, people literate. Let's help them to be able to, do math. Let's help them to be able to understand the sciences. Let's help them to be able to do and have these skills so that they can go out and do a good job with whatever their career might be. It's a very practical use. Now what we're seeing is a switch over into things that become very socially oriented. And so now schools are teaching things like sex education instead of that being a conversation that you had with your parents. And so schools are taking over what should be conversations at home. And what we're seeing is it's actually through the schools and the institutions where the idea of that universal moral code that I mentioned, that's being eroded away. So we're actually seeing a trend towards nihilism because the idea is, well, this moral code is not really helping individuals, it's holding people back, and we're seeing that being taught in schools. So, whether an individual parent feels like, no, I have to send my kid to school, I gotta work, I can't homeschool them, or whatever a personal conviction may be, a parent has to be aware of what that child is being taught. And not only that, but that parent has to be ready to have conversations at home and has to be prepared to teach their children at home. And beyond that too, just as a side note, so I do homeschool my kids now. We had sent my daughter to just a Christian school for a year just because she's very independent minded like me. And so I wanted to give her the experience of what is it like to sit down in a classroom and respect your teacher. And after just a month of being there, I had a conversation with her that pointed out just a mentality that she came home with, that her teacher was smarter than her parents. And to me, that just blew my mind because I knew it wasn't coming from the school itself. Because I respected and I trusted her kindergarten teacher, but it came with the idea of the institution that it's my teacher who's educating me, not my parents, and therefore my teacher has more authority in my life and knows more. And when I realized that, I thought, oh no, like I can't be teaching my kids that, even if I'm not purposely teaching them, it's kind of inadvertently happening. So yeah, that's kind of a huge question. And so whether it's I think people have to personally answer it for themselves, but no matter whether you're at home with your kids or whether your kids are in public school or whether you decide to go off to college, I think that you can study these issues. I think that you can be well aware of what's happening. And I think that your kids can be well educated. So sorry, that was kind of a long answer.
No, I think that was on the money, and I actually agree 100%. I completely secular, public school, university, master's, the whole 9 yards was all secular. But to your point, when I was in school, it was a lot more agnostic. Probably now it's becoming a little bit more hostile. This will I could probably pretty much answer this one. This question is a statement, then a question. I think a pastor, counselor, and apologist are all necessities in the church today, not just a pastor, as this model no longer works. Do you agree?
Yeah, that's tough. We go specifically to church, to learn scripture, and we expect that, the pastor has studied that, but, it's still our responsibility to study and to know scripture. And certainly a pastor has a role of shepherding people, and it's not just scripture either, it's to be there to help serve. And so when somebody has an issue like, a struggle with pornography or something like that, certainly a pastor is supposed to be there to come right alongside. But I do think that there should be other people in the church that, like you're saying, have roles like an apologist and can do other things, because there's a lot out there, and God asks us to be prepared to give an answer. And so, sometimes that answer of like, well, I believe it's that way that's not enough. I think that we need to trust that God leads us when we talk to people, but at the same time, I think that we should be well studied. So in whatever specific area that is, whether it's in scripture or whether it is in apologetics or whatever that might be. I do think that having a well-rounded church specifically would be a blessing. And I think in a lot of churches we are missing that. So.
All right, this one, I think it's a question. The church seems to be more of a problem than help. It seems to me that the church is just as toxic as the secular world, especially with all of the Roman Catholic cover-ups that we've heard about over the years. A lot of healing is needed. And they've kind of left it open-ended. I don't know if you just want to comment on that.
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad that they brought this up. So here's the thing. I kind of asked that question, like, if God made us in his image, like, shouldn't we act like it? And so, yes, there is kind of this standard of, like, you expect the church to look different than the world. You expect us to not struggle with stuff. What people forget is that we're all human. And so we all fail, and we all have the exact same temptations. So like we're seeing with pornography, you know, whether you're Christian or not, we all feel the exact same thing. We all struggle with the exact same sexual temptations. And so, you know, the idea here is not that the church is any better than people who don't go to church or who aren't Christians. The only thing that makes the church different is that we have laid down our life and have said, I can't do this on my own. I need somebody to fix me. I need somebody to heal me. I need somebody to do this for me because I'm wretched. And we have let Christ do that. So it's basically like, you know, somebody, you know, us saying, that's it, I'm sick, I can't do it, I need a cure. And, you know, we go to Jesus and he says, here's the cure. And then we go into the room and say, guys, I'm healed, I'm fixed. It's not that we're better because of anything about us. It's only that we've received a gift. And so I think what's happening is that, yes, the church looks exactly like the world. And that is really sad because it shouldn't. We should also have that strength in Jesus to overcome our temptation. But at the same time, we're just human. And so that shouldn't stop the church when we fail from getting back up again and from, you know, continuing this conversation and from looking to Christ. So I do think that there is a sense in which, yes, it is sad that a lot of these unrestrained sexual behaviors have just permeated through the church and the church is struggling with it. But I think a lot of the issue is just that the church hasn't been honest over the last few decades, that it's been trying to hide its face, hide its shame. And instead, the church needs to get out in the open and get down on its knees and say, guys, I struggle just like you. I have failed just like you. And I am not any better than you. The only thing that's different is that I have accepted this gift. And I just want to share that with you. So I don't know, that would be my comment to that.
Amen. As we enter 2020, we're moving into legalizing elements of polygamy and pedophilia without an objective foundation of right or wrong. Where will this stop? And is there any reason to foresee it stopping at all without that foundation?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I don't think there's going to be any stopping it. I think that everything's going to become permissible. One of the things that we talk about in the book too is the idea that pornography is actually going to kind of be overtaken in a sense by just physical and intimate relationships with robots. And so that might sound incredibly weird, but what they're saying is that it's going to seem weird at first, like pornography was kind of taboo, and then it's going to become normalized. And so we're going to start seeing just all sorts of things that we're like what? Like this doesn't seem normal. This doesn't seem right. And then over time, because we've eroded away that universal moral standard that we used to have, you know, once we kind of broke down what the definition of marriage was, all of this stuff now becomes just acceptable. And so I don't think it's really going to stop anywhere. And the problem is that what the world is actually trying to do is you're going to have a lot of people who are advocating out there for, you know, like I said, like people are trying to get rid of, you know, like let's decrease sex trafficking, like let's get rid of STDs. But a lot of times what's happening is they're putting the Band-Aid on the issue without actually trying to solve what's causing the problem. And so, if we can get rid of the physical harms, yeah, sure, we're all going to look a lot better. We're going to feel a lot better. But that can't ever solve the emotional, the social, and the spiritual harms, even if we can manage to, physically, just immediately wipe out, STDs when it happens and things like that. So I think it's just going to continue to escalate until we all get at the root of the problem, which is our heart. It's not just behavior, it's our heart.
Excellent. And as soon as you were answering that, I reordered the questions because you hit on two that I think will flow well into this, just building on what you just said. So I'm going to change the order up here a little bit. You rightly compare what we're seeing today with unrestrained sexual behavior with that of ancient Rome in your book. Francis Schaeffer long pointed out that Rome fell more from inward decay than external forces. Do you see this same conclusion for the West if it does not mend its ways?
Yeah, so in a sense, it's a hard question to answer. And I don't think I really have an answer in terms of like, what do I really think is going to happen? Can the U.S. really sustain itself? Can it, is it going to decay? Or even just the world at large, because, every nation is kind of having issues like this. But at least for me, it just seems like this is escalating and it's snowballing, and at some point something's going to happen. So, I think from a biblical perspective, we see that God has promised that he's going to come back and he's going to take care of this and that we will see justice happen. But I don't foresee that I don't foresee the world solving the problem. I don't foresee people, waking up one day and saying like, wow, we've killed a lot of our babies, like maybe we should stop that. Or, I don't foresee the world saying like, wow, we've been abusing and objectifying women, like we should stop that. I think that that's going to just continue on until God has to intervene and say, okay, enough, guys. And actually one of the things too to think about is, the idea of like, okay, if God really exists, like why is there all of this evil? One of the things that I've heard is the idea that God is being patient with us. So it's not that we won't see justice for all these things, but the idea that in his love and his mercy, he is trying to give as many people as possible the opportunity to find healing and hope in Jesus. And so he is being patient. And so, one day we can have hope that there is justice for all of this that we see. So.
Amen. These two questions I'm going to put together. The first one is, because you mentioned the word Band-Aid earlier. I loved your book, and I read through it quite quickly as an easy read. My question, though, is I felt like it was like putting a Band-Aid on cancer to some degree. What I mean by this is the heart of the problem seems to be the abandonment of God. Until we get back to God and the cross, I don't see that we can truly heal. What are your thoughts? A second question, just to kind of tie onto that one, because I thought they went together. This person says, I am not religious. Is there a way to avoid Christianity, but still reverse the sexual Holocaust as you describe it? Can society stay anti-Christian, but still heal itself?
Yeah, so at least with the book itself, our point was not to try to offer a solution. So, I don't even think we offered a Band-Aid. I think we basically just said, hey, you have cancer. We're not offering the Band-Aid yet, which is, I think, one of the reasons why we're trying to figure out like what to do next. What is the solution? Now, I think I did kind of answer it a little bit before. Like, I don't think the world can find a solution to this without Christianity. I guess let me say it this way. I think the world will find something that it's satisfied with, but it's going to look good on the outside, and on the inside, it's still going to be pretty icky. And I think we might see something like that. Like, we're going to see a lot of people who are still emotionally hurting. I think we're still going to see the breakdown of society. It's going to look very different. But maybe on the outside, it's going to look better. Maybe they can find a cure for sexually transmitted diseases. Maybe they can, cure certain things. So I don't know. I guess that would be maybe just kind of my guess then for that.
Good. All right. A couple of easy ones. Well, I say easy. Would you recommend any other books for raising my kids in a homeschool environment? They are approaching puberty, and I'm fearful of them going into the world unprepared.
Yeah. Okay. So slightly unprepared for this one. They're sitting over there. I have a whole stack of books that go through what it's like to go through puberty. It even talks about like sex with your kids, but it's all from a Christian perspective, and it goes all the way up through kind of the teenage years. I cannot remember the author though, but I got them all just so I'd be prepared with my kids. I think I found them on a blog that a mom talked about, but I think if you go to, I think it's Focus on the Family, I think they talk about it too. So I don't know, maybe afterwards I can give you guys the title if you want to put them up on your Facebook page and you can list those. But I think those would be really helpful because, yeah, I think it's one of those things that we're like, oh, how do I talk to my kids about these, how do I talk to my kids about this stuff? And again, I realize that it's just me that feels awkward. My kids they're curious, but they're not ashamed about anything yet. And that's a good thing. Like, I don't want them to be ashamed of their sexuality. I want them to realize that, oh, wow, my wonderful husband just brought me all of the books. Okay. So here are a couple of them. So Facing the Facts, The Truth About Sex and You. So these are all based on ages. So that's ages 12 to 6. That's by Stan and Brenna Jones. So another one, What's the Big Deal? Why Does God Care About Sex? Ages 8 to 12. So they have a whole series. There's another one by Jim Burns, How God Makes Babies. So there are some resources out there that definitely go through this. So again, I'm realizing that for a kid, they don't have any of this type of they're not ashamed yet. And I want to keep it that way, that my kids aren't ashamed, that when things happen, that we can talk to them about it and that they can realize like, oh, okay, like I have to protect myself, and I don't want to just protect myself now. Like I want to protect my future self and, my relationship with my wife if I have one. And so I'm starting to have conversations with my kids like that. So those might be a couple of books that people might be interested in.
All right. Is it true that the sex slave trade is still alive and well throughout pretty much all the world?
Yeah, so it is. Unfortunately, it's actually growing. And one of the things that I actually just read today was the idea with that Netflix movie that's coming out called Cuties. The whole idea behind that is that that's actually going to make sex trafficking increase, in the sense that you're going to find a lot of these young girls who want to feel sexy, they want to rebel against their parents, and it's going to lead them into circles that are just going to take advantage of them, that are going to basically put them in bondage and slavery. And so I wouldn't be surprised if over the next few years we actually see sex trafficking just increase tremendously after this movie.
There was a book put together about 15 years ago with the Barna Group, called Unchristian. In this book, Barna documents where Christian sexual behavior and outlook was just as bad, if not worse, than the non-Christian. In other words, the days are long gone when Christians stood out for their impeccable behavior. So is the bigger societal problem with the church or the unchurched? And I think what they're kind of hitting at is, because they put a lot more, it looks like what they're basically saying is, in that book, they polled a bunch of Christian, non-Christian, and they couldn't really tell a difference. So what can the church do a little bit to kind of get back on course, where you do see a distinct line between Christian and non-Christian? If that makes sense.
Yeah, so I mean, I did answer this a little bit before, just in terms of the way that the church looks and the way that the unchurched looks. But I think in terms of what the church can do is, I think that the church just needs to start being real again. I think people need to just start being out there and open and honest and not afraid of topics like this. I think that they need to start discussing them. I think they need to start discussing them in church, in small groups, in their family, with their neighbors. I mean, I think the idea is that if we can be, in a sense, vulnerable, actually show that we are real people who struggle, and that there's nothing special about us, and be humble about it. I think that that's what's going to make the change in somebody else's life, that they know, wow, you're not judging me. You know, you're not being self-righteous, that you've gone through this and, you know, you just want to help. And, you know, maybe somebody as a Christian who, you know, hasn't gone through an issue like this, they could still be just as humble and just as loving and still come alongside people and say, I'm just here to help you. I'm no better than you. Like, you might struggle with a sexual sin and I struggle with something else. It's just all the same, basically. So.
All right, this one is on a little bit on the abortion topic, but most of them weren't, so I'll go ahead and ask it. Thank you so much for your work. To build upon your description of ubiquitous abortion, we are seeing growing numbers of women not only content with abortions, but proud of them. We only have to look at secular shows like The View to see how proud some of these women are about their abortion. So my question is, if you feel the sexual revolution is just as much, if not more, a result of a radical feminism than it is a true sexual holocaust.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I'm going to talk about my husband for a second. So I have found that in my relationship with my husband, that when my husband is like overly controlling, I react to that in trying to be in control then. When my husband is in charge in the sense that he's leading, but he's still loving, I'm like, whoa, this is awesome. And I think that that describes what's happening in society. I think that women, what has happened with abortion, it's women trying to gain control again. I think that we have seen so much abuse. I think we have seen so much objectification of women. I think that we have seen so much, you know, trafficking and everything else that has made women feel out of control. And instead of the leadership that men should have and the love that they should have given and the respect that they should have given, I think we've been seeing the opposite. And so I think women feel like, okay, you can't touch my body. You can't control my body. I'm going to be in charge of that. I'm going to have that right then to do whatever with my body that I want to do. And so I think what's happening then is we're kind of seeing this cycle again, that in reaction, we see women being proud of their abortions. It's a way for them to be in control. But what we're also seeing is now the demasculization of men. We're trying to feminize men in order for men to not be in control. And I'm not blaming all this on men. I think that women are just as at fault too in a lot of this. But I'm just giving this as an example of one of the things that I think has led to the abortion situation. And, you know, I see that just personally, you know, when my husband gets controlling, I rise up and try to fight back. And so I can see how that's going to happen in society at large. And yet I see that when my husband leads with a gentle hand, and yet he's still completely in control, but he does it with me in terms of like, I'm doing this for my wife and I'm doing it to protect her, and I can see that type of love, then I'm like, wow, like, yeah, I don't want to do this. Like, you take it. It's very freeing for me. I have you know, more ability then to pursue the things that I want to do. It's a weight off of my shoulders. And I think, you know, women missed the ball at that. We didn't respond the right way. We didn't react the right way. Instead, we said, well, then I'm going to be in control of whatever I can grab. And we thought, well, our bodies, we're going to take that. And so, again, that's not a complete answer, and I don't want to blame men at all. I just think that that's one area where we're seeing that happening. That's why we're seeing a lot of women then now react and be proud of what's happening instead of realizing that, you know, maybe they should have reacted a different way.
And this question kind of goes in with that one. So, I mean, anything, obviously, you don't need to re-answer it, but they're specifically asking, which ties into that. I love the book Wild at Heart by John Eldridge, and his wife did one on a beauty to be rescued or something like that. Some have attacked them for being too distinctly masculine and feminine. Do you know their work, and would you recommend it?
I know of them. I don't think I've read them. So I don't think I can comment on those.
Got it. Looks like we've got two more. It seems more than coincidental that antidepressant use, suicide, apathy, and a decline in Christianity are all happening at the same time. Are these all just confirmations that once we abandon our Christian base, these things will just continue to grow? I know you've kind of touched on that, but
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with the pervading the mentality today that actually nihilism that we've kind of talked about, the idea that life is kind of meaningless, like that universal moral code that we've talked about, it's meaningless. And so the idea now that we are seeing people just struggling with like, what does life mean? Where do I go? What do I do? You know, I pursued my own pleasure, my own, you know, whatever I wanted to do with sexuality and life in general. And so we're seeing the consequences of that. We're seeing, you know, the depression, we're seeing addiction. So I think what it takes is I think we have to start changing what the media puts out. I think we have to stop, you know, just institutions from teaching certain mentalities. I think that we need to be out there re-educating people to say, hey, wait a second, like, do you realize like your worldview, like, do you realize where that leads? Like, it leads to meaninglessness. And actually show the idea of like, you've got two choices. You can have meaning to life, which means that you're responsible then for what life means. And so you're going to be held accountable, or life might mean nothing to you. And in which case, then we're going to see that there's an increase in depression and suicide, because if it's meaningless, then, you know, when it gets too tough, why not take your life? And so, yeah, we're definitely seeing an increase in those things.
it ties in very close to what you just said. I was an apologist for a long time. Finally, the new generation being so apathetic seemed to do me in, as a total apathetic worldview is very hard to combat, which basically is just, they're not arguing whether he or she was right or wrong, they just don't care. Any advice as an apologist how to handle a strictly apathetic worldview?
Yeah, that one's a tough one, because you can't make people care. It's definitely, it comes down to their heart. And it's definitely a heart issue. I think one of the things that I'm working on is a book called, you know, talks about fluid spirituality, and it has a lot to do with kind of that apathy that we're seeing nowadays. There's a lot of apathy because everybody thinks that anything goes. You know, we've been talking about anything goes sexuality. There's actually a lot of anything goes. You know, anything goes with your life, your religion, whatever you want to do, your morality. And that's the state that we're living in today. And so I think that's why there's so much apathy, is they think that everything is relative. It's up to me to do whatever I want. And, you know, I can't judge somebody else. You know, I'd be called intolerant then. And so because of that, people have backed off of actually holding a standard to themselves and to others. And so I think what we have to do is, I think we have to correct that mindset of relativism that's running rampant, and talk to people about the idea of just, you know, this kind of fluid, anything goes, you know, worldview that we're seeing out there today. That's not, there are pitfalls in that worldview, and discuss that worldview and what's that like, and then compare it to Christianity, and actually show how when we consider God and we consider moral standards, we consider that, wow, that raises the bar, that raises the standard, that makes life better in a sense. So I don't know, that's definitely a tough question. At least for right now, that's kind of all I would offer as a starting place. So.
All right, the last question, unless one pops in. Thank you, Bridgette. I really enjoyed the talk. To be honest, I'm a 50-year-old male, did not think I would, so that's good. But I had a question. How has the notion of scientism, the utter rule of science, natural science over all things, helped to hasten the sexual revolution as is apparent in the 20th century. I think of what C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength described. If secular science rules, then I only see the problems getting worse. It seems like this is all just a byproduct of the death of God movement a century ago.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I can really fully answer that. I think that a lot of this does have to do with the death of God movement. And I think that there's a lot of things going on in terms of just, you know, what we're seeing today. I don't know. I'm not really sure how to answer that one. That's kind of a tough one. So I'm just going to leave it at I don't know for that one. So
we actually did get one last one come in. I'm quite a bit older, female, but do you think we should reevaluate courtship over dating? So
yeah, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask for that, just because when I was going to date my husband, before we went on our first date, I looked him in the eyes and I said, I'm not going to date you if you're not going to marry me. And he said, okay. And so that was kind of how we started our relationship. So whether you court or whether you date, I think what has to happen is I think that people have to have a standard for themselves, that they say, this is what I want out of life. This is my standard. This is my standard for sexuality. This is my moral standard. These are my, I'm not going to cross this line. And I think when you have that standard, I think the idea is that when you're meeting somebody and you're considering being in a relationship with somebody, you need to be open and honest with that person. It's not fair to drag people along. It's not fair to, get into a relationship with somebody if you don't think it's going to lead to marriage. So I don't know. I think a lot of it just has more to do with your heart and being open and honest with people than whether you're going to call something courtship or dating. So I don't know. I'd kind of leave it at that.
Well, you made it. That was a lot of questions. I think that is going to be a fantastic video that I hope people share with their church groups, their skeptical friends, all the above. And again, sexualholocaust.org. Whoops. And again, it's got, Stephen's going to put he's got the site back up there. And yeah, no, I think this was fantastic. And I don't know if you had any closing comments. Stephen, do you want to go ahead and add your 2 cents in? Because I know we've got Jay Seegert also is going to be up next. I think that's September 11th. So definitely you'll want to tune in with Stephen's side as well.
Yeah. Hey guys. All right. So yeah, we have Jay Seegert coming up, and you'll definitely want to stay in touch with us for that. And it's really such a great talk. Thank you so much, James, for coordinating this. Thank you, Bridgette, for putting it on, and Ashley for coming along and asking those really thought-provoking questions. I hope that everyone was blessed by this talk. And just like Bridgette was saying, that it's so important that we start from a young age teaching our children like in the way they should go, right? And that's what the Bible says for us as Christians. If you're not a Christian, you're listening, maybe asking a Christian friend, like, what does it mean, right, to like even point my kid in this moral direction? And that might be a good place for you to start in the conversation. But no matter where you're coming from, we're glad that you were able to hang out with us for a little bit this evening, and really looking forward to the future discussions that we'll be having on this topic and a wide variety of other topics that include creation and apologetics. So I just wanted to pop in one more time real quick before we said our farewells and let you guys know again, when it comes to building that strong biblical worldview for all kids, it's so important they have access to quality biblical worldview education programs and the books that Bridgette was talking about. And there's so many resources out there. It can be kind of hard, honestly, to figure out what's the good stuff, right? And we can look at that from the perspective of museums. Like, there are so many amazing museums out there. Which ones are good, right? The good news is that all museums can be used for good. So all the natural history museums out there, you probably have one that's close by to you. You can use that to teach your kids about God's world through the lens of God's word. For the time being right now, we're actually giving virtual tours during the pandemic of the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. And you can learn more about those at christianmuseumtours.com. I don't have the website up, but it's all one word, christianmuseumtours.com. And let me tell you, it has been such an amazing blessing to see hundreds of kids, thousands of families really be transformed by the truths in God's word as we go through even the secular museum. And so that just goes to show us that God can use things that we think are too far removed, right? But God can still use them for good. And so we want you to join us in seeing God change all of our lives. So join us at christianmuseumtours.com, and we hope to see you there soon. So for myself, James, and the rest of the team at International Association for Creation, we're so glad that you could join us tonight. Thanks so much, and God bless.